Dobrý večer. Dobrý večer. Ďakujem, že ste prišli v takom hojnom počte. Je to milé prekvapenie. Na druhej strane musím povedať, že mi je trochu trápno a smutno, že som musela siahnuť niečomu takému, ako je prezenčná listina. Nemyslela som si to, že tým budem konfrontovať ľudí v poslednom ročníku štúdia na tejto škole, takže verím, že aspoň tým, ktorí ste tu doteraz vôbec nechodili, že vám je rovnako trápne ako mne. Prezenčná listina sa nachádza u kolegu Adama Gajdoša. Keď bude po prednáške, tak sa prosím zapíšte tí, ktorí tu ste. Ďakujem. Now I will switch to English after having this part behind us. I'm very, very pleased that today we can welcome here an architect who is very dear to us because she is really dealing with public good. And our guest today is Cristina Monteiro. She is from the office DKCM, which she invented or established together with her colleague David Knight a few years ago. And she works mainly for public sector, improving public spaces, housing, and creating strategies for better life in general. Just to amuse you a little bit and catch your interest, I would like to show you this book which Cristina brought to our library. And it's called Public Houses, A Cultural and Social History of the London Pub. So I hope this makes you somehow engaged in what will continue, even if Cristina told me that she will not speak about pubs today, but I guess this is something we have all in common to be interested in pubs as a space for socializing. I will not talk much more. By the way, it was part of a very important, not that book, but the previous one, which was a catalog, was part of the Biennale in Venice in 2022. Cristina received many awards for her work. She's well famous in UK, especially in London, and her office that well. And there are not only architects, but also people from other professions. Because, as I already put it, she's preparing strategies for urban planning and let's say restoration of public realm in general. So now I will give the word to you, Cristina. Again, thank you very much for being with us and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Henrietta. It's a real pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to show the work that my practice does. The lecture today is called Working in Public, Architecture as an Act of Collective Care. So this is our office as of last year. Our practice works in the public sector in London, and our work spans from strategies to designing and retrofitting buildings. In our practice, we are multidisciplinary practice, and my partner, David, is a planner or urban designer. And we have graphic designers, we have people that specialize in consultation and speaking with people. So we are a mix of, we have a mix of skills in-house. This lecture, I wanted to have a thesis for this lecture. And I think this statement kind of captures the lecture and the spirit of what I'm going to speak about today. Architecture becomes truly public not through endless cycles of new construction, but through patient work of repair, the generous spirit of stewardship, and the act of sharing authorship with communities. We established in 2012, but David and I collaboration began in 2000 when I moved to London. I suppose I just wanted to do a quote from Lina Bobardi. She said, I never wanted to be young. What I really wanted was to have history. And I think we have to acknowledge that we all have history, and again, we carry a lot of that in our work. So David and I started our collaboration, like I said, in 2000, but we formalized the practice in 2012. I came from the coastal suburbs of Porto in Portugal, and David came from the coastal suburbs of Brighton in the UK. But we were both really ready for an urban life, and that's what we got in London. And today we're still considered young architects. Goodness knows for how much longer. Our first small project was a little bit of an accident. It was a project for two musician friends, Don Coyote and Emily Barker, and was a tiny modest commission that accidentally took us to the Venice Biennale in 2012. And this is a photo by Jürgen Teller from that time. I think what a glamorous way of starting a practice, really, and it's been downhill from then. But we haven't really looked back. So today, the lecture is going to be in 4 parts, if we don't count the first part as the introduction, which I'll give you a little bit of context of how we work. But the first is care as a methodology. The second one is repair as a civic practice. Third one, stewardship as long-term thinking, co-authorship as a form of practice. Again, all our projects touch on these, but I picked a project per theme to better explain our work through that angle. So throughout this presentation today, I will do some quotes and will mention people, because our work is not in isolation. We don't consider ourselves either radical or pioneers. We are part of a constellation, an ecosystem of practices and thinking. And this slide shows some of our influences, practices, and artists that some alive, some practicing today, some emerging, like us, which our work has direct influence from. And this list is by no means complete, and I'm sure there's lots of people that are missing. I think for any practice, the big starting point is who are our clients. And we have been very lucky to be working with the Mayor of London's team, more specifically the GLA Planning and Regeneration Unit since 2012. This is a local government department that has evolved from what was called Design for London, which was a unit in the Mayor's office that focused on making design accessible and design for not as a luxury. So this is London. Most of you know about. But yeah, for Design for London, and still today for the GLA Planning and Regeneration Unit, design is not a luxury. It's infrastructure for dignity. Design is for everyone. And this is what we bring to our practice. And how does that manifest itself in real life? So the GLA created a framework for designers which anyone can compete for. It's typically quite a drawn-out process, competition process. but with the promise that you'll get work if you get shortlisted. And for the second time, due to being young and disruptors, we have been shortlisted. And this is where our work comes from. And I think it kind of, and we are, there's many lots, many different types, and we are on 2 lots. Lot 1, which is led by my partner, David Knight, Dr. David Knight, and Lot 5, which is civic, cultural, and social infrastructure, which I focus on as well. Today, I'm going to focus on the civic and civic work that I do in the practice. And part 1, care as a methodology. If you follow my column for the Architects Journal, you might have seen that I often write about William Morris. And you might know that whenever I don't know an answer, I ask, what would William Morris do? Which is quite a strange thing, but I find it that focuses my brain. But William Morris was a very important, influential person, and he started the SPAB, the Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings, and that was a radical act. He argued that careful repair over restoration would honor all the periods of a life's building. They were called the Anti-Scrape Society. And really, it all began with these humble, it all began with this building. This building is called St. John Baptist Church, and it's in Inglesham. And he started SPAB in order to protect the interior of this church and this church, because Victorian approach to restoration was very heavy-handed. And so with these became a whole new philosophy of understanding building fabric. And that's really what I mean for care, but also impact. And these has really usually influenced this framework, this international framework, which some of you might have heard about, which is called ECOMAS, which certainly is central to the way I practice conservation and the way a lot of conservation architects and architects approach conservation and repair works. So, again, I promised some quotes, and I've got quite a few. The past is not dead, it's living in us, and will be alive in the future, which we are now all helping to make. This is another reference, which I think it sort of fulfills the present, this future that Morris talks about. It's a project by a German practice called Naumann Architektur in the early 2000s that has so much influenced the way I practice. And I think you will probably see. So I think for me, this reference is kind of a touchstone. And I'll start with showing you a project, Arrows Art Center, which I think learns from that approach to enjoying the history and the layers of a place whilst creating a dignified new new place as well. So the Arrow Art Center was initially built as a school, a boarding school for children of people that worked in the colonies. And it's ceased to be a school in the mid 20th century, and since then has become a cultural facility. And this is how it looks today. Oh, actually, not today, because there is an extension. Some of our master plan has been implemented, but this is how it looked before our work started. And again, in the Arrow Center is a completely loved place. It's a very vibrant cultural center that served its community since the 90s with a very diverse offer and reaching a very diverse demographics, from yoga classes, painting, ballet classes, music classes, cinema screenings, performance. The cultural center of Harrow is really here. And our commission came due to austerity, where local authorities were first forced to cut budgets cut budgets for supporting organizations like these. And our job was really to make a master plan that would help them have financial sustainability. And for that, we wanted to make sure that with them, we would work with them to understand how could that be. And again, on this slide, we always do these on all our projects. We look at the historic mapping and we try to understand the morphology of the place. And so here you can see that since the 19th century until the 60s, so this is a 100-year picture, the space and the campus evolved, and we wanted our master plan to recognize that, but make adjustments that were facilitating a coherent campus. So how do we go about working with understanding the buildings that we have in a campus like these? We worked closely with Robert Bevan. Robert Bevan is our heritage consultant for this project, and he does drawings like these. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm not sure. He does drawings like these, where he assesses the significance of each building. And as you can see, here the Elliott Hall building was considered the most significant and the listed building. And then there were locally listed buildings and neutral buildings and buildings of medium significance, but not listed locally or nationally. And together with this appraisal, we created a master plan around 5 or 6 principles, which was to nurture existing buildings, regardless of their significance or not, to develop sustainably, to improve the navigation system, to retain and enhance the diversity of uses, to prototype the spaces that already are there, and to develop incrementally. I'm going to show you our first delivered set of projects in this master plan. We've only been appointed to do the master plan and the first phase, which was to save these 3, as you can see in black, agricultural buildings. These 3 buildings were largely overlooked, surviving only as storage. And initially, the client was considering demolition and replacing it with porta cabins, which is modular systems. But luckily, the budget didn't stretch for temporary buildings. So we just had to make good the existing buildings, which was good. So yeah, this is the plan of these 3 buildings that we managed to make good with the budget that wouldn't be enough for 3 porta cabins. And I'm going to show you the boiler house that no longer was working as a boiler house because it no longer was working as a boiler house, and it was just storage. And I'm showing you some technical drawings because I think it's always useful to show technical drawings to students. And these are the existing drawings. And here, we had a very small budget. Our budget was to replace the windows and the fenestration, and to paint and to decorate the interior. And we always do this work, which is to write a gazetteer for every single elevation of historic buildings. So I was just giving you a little window onto that technical report. And yeah, so this is the elevation as it was, as found, as a storage facility. This was our hope for the space, and this is how it is today. Again, the nature of the proposal is extremely humble, and we did the reglazing, learning from the existing, and we turned something that was out of use into a new public use. And this is the interior. Again, we left the floor with the trays from the boiler house, and we sort of enjoy the kind of layers of history and the fact that the floor is cracked, and it brings a kind of character and patina. Care as close observation in this project. We analyzed the building, we analyzed the condition. We had to be very, very rigorous about the interventions that we made. And in many ways, we learned from Lina Bobadi's project in Essay Pompeii, which we visited a couple of years ago now. And again, Lina Bobadi, SMP in São Paulo in the 70s was the transformation of a 1930s oil drum factory, and she was inspired by what the locals were already doing there. So she did do new interventions, but she also restored the factories rather than starting afresh and anew. And for us, it's a really instrumental project that has influenced the way we approached and designed the strategy for the master plan for this project. And again, inspired by locals who were already activating the abandoned spaces. embraced industrial character, minimal but incisive interventions, making the space flexible for cultural uses, and yes, she had the opportunity to also do quite bold interventions too. And that's a photo of it in use after nearly 40 years, if not more, in São Paulo today. So the next project that I'm going to show you is a project that we started in 2018, and it's the refurbishment of a tiny little building called Brusco Public Conveniences. And this little building is loaded with history. And it's a project that was spearheaded by a community group called The Last Elm, because on this street, all the elms were demolished at the end of the 19th century, and the toilet was the last elm. And the last elm gave place for a public convenience, built initially in the basement, and in 1922 was expanded for the provision of women with this little arts and crafts pavilion. And in the 70s was still in use, but unfortunately in the 80s faced closure, and in the late 90s became listed and on the risks register, and nationally listed means it was protected, but in the risk register. And later in 2018, this is how it looked before the construction, and we worked with the community group and with the borough to see it become, to serve the communities. This building is kind of a testament for women's emancipation. Like I said, it was built initially in the basement primarily for men, and Victorian women were campaigning for access to public conveniences, and this incredible pavilion was built, and asserting women's rights to occupy public space. So I think, though it's so tiny, it's such a poignant piece of architecture, and for us it was really important that it was rescued, and that we could find a life for this building that would both serve for people to use as a public toilet, but that could also have a different use. So I'll talk you a little bit about the repairs that were needed, and again we did with Robert Bevan, a significance assessment, and these drawings illustrate the things that were the sort of the way the building evolved, the things that were significant and needed repair, and the things that could be replaced or were indeed harming the building. So these drawings capture that understanding, and was something that we worked together with Historic England, the conservation officer, the heritage consultant, to understand how we could conserve and repair the fabric of this building. Again, these drawings show the different phases of the building. And here is one of our first drawings, whereby the existing ground floor footprint was so small that it was very hard to be able to have a a cafe or a community use as well as public conveniences. So we had to work really hard to carve out space for that. And we wanted to learn from the language of the railings such that the new architecture didn't fight with the pavilion. So again, this was when you're on site or when you're on the street, you hardly see the new intervention, which is quite common in extensions to significant buildings. And this was us playing with the language of the railings. Interestingly, the conservation officer was very keen that the building didn't go over the eaves of the building, which became such a hard brief. And this is about sort of not creating a building that's subordinate to these very humble building. So the mastery is a mastery of the skies. And it's so interesting in section. Again, the pavilion has to sort of climb up this embankment, and there's a railway over there, which is not drawn. And again, to make sure that we had a compliant building height that wasn't tight, and we created, these kind of gap between the existing and the new. So yeah, reading the building is very important when you're doing conservation works. And you have to do a lot of investigation because when you're unpacking years of degradation, you always find new problems. And it's been a journey of conservation, understanding what to do with glazed bricks, having a structure that became unsafe as well. The steel beams were in a really poor condition. So it required a lot of care and time, and it was a real lesson for me in terms of conservation. And this is some of the drawings of that we worked in order to get permission with a conservation architect, because all the interiors were protected as well. So this is the building on site last year. And I really like this image because it sort of really talks about the way we work. So the screen here is the original screen. And this screen is the new screen that we designed that directly faces the screen. And these marble, quite a lot of people, when they visit the site, it's like, wow, you used marble, but actually the marble was there, and it was the original marble from the urinals. So we repurposed the marble to make the accessible toilet, and also to make the countertop for the cafe. And we also used the marble for the kitchen spaces in the basement. So all the marble that was there, we reused. And yes, I think the language of the new and the old, I think, is quite bold. We deliberately used a very pale timber, pine, or Douglas fir, in fact, to address the old. And all our interventions were pale, in contrast to the darker colored timber. And this is the building today. And this November, just a month ago, it was on the BBC as it officially became removed from the Buildings Risk Register, and Historic England did a feature on it. So we're extremely proud to see this building rescued, even though it's tiny. So this is a quote from Octavia Hill, who most of you might not know, but she's an incredible woman. And she says she's written many essays and guidance, and I'll give you an introduction to her, but she says, for the work is one of detail, looking back over the years as they pass, one sees progress that's not small. So I think with small things like these, hopefully, we will see a different kind of progress. So for those that don't know about Octavia Hill, she's most famous for being one of the co-founders of the National Trust. And somehow I wished someone did a film about her, because she was phenomenal, incredible woman, a housing reformer. She bought up slum properties and repaired them. She had a cooperative with training young women. She was unparalleled. And yeah, I've recently read a biography, and it's really worth a read. Incredible woman. And that leads me really well into repair civic practice, which is part 2. And you're going to have a sneak preview of a project that we're not supposed to show to anyone until February, but it was impossible not to, which is a project that we just finished on site called Camber Sands. And it's the Camber Sands Welcome Centre. And Camber Sands is the only sandy, or the most significant sandy beach outside London. And it sees about 25,000 visitors per day in the summer, and is also adjacent to a site of special protection and environmental protection. And as part of our process, we did a lot of engagement with the coastal officers, local business, seasonal visitors, schools, environmental stakeholders, the RNLI. It was about a year of conversation before we set onto the ground, if the building in the ground, if not more. And this process was throughout all the phases of design development and construction as well. So this is the building as it is now. Should have been an existing plan, apologies. But you can see it's a building that faces a car park, and it basically the welcome center, or the visitor center for people that come to the beach, but also it serves the community during the low peak season. So our work was to balancing those multiple needs, and we had to consider the growing visitor demand, aging infrastructure. We had to be really conscious of the dune system that's moving, and also making sure that the building could host an education program. So this is a drawing we did really right at the beginning with Jesper. Obviously, we've replaced the building because we designed the building since, but the idea is that we made a drawing that captured the way that the building would become a center point for children learning about the dune systems as well. And this is the kind of drawing we do to communicate with different with different audiences. This plan is the plan of the new building, and again, it's not a new building, or this is an existing building, and this is an existing building. The extension is only this part, and the colonnade. So it's quite a theatrical civic gesture we've done, where we converted these two very humble-looking buildings, and the sand is very ubiquitous. It's there, everywhere. It's not just nostalgic. And our interventions really celebrated the fact that we were retaining existing fabric, but that the new addition was very generous, but light, and brought a kind of civic character to the building. And again, these are some of our construction drawings. I just dropped one. So you see that architects do a lot of revisions during site. And this is a sneak preview of one of the bathrooms. And again, this space was existing, not with the glamorous new sinks. And this is the new, very light roof, timber framed. So this was the drawing we made. We wanted the architecture of this building to really echo the architecture and the character of the architecture and of the surrounding buildings. And we wanted really it to become a beacon or a lighthouse for the people that were on the beach. And I think we did quite well in making it close to our illustrations. And we really wanted the building to be quiet and small, facing the bungalow and the small stature of the village. So the columns are perhaps the most, the columns and the loggia is the most civic element, and the character of the columns was to echo some of the fun that people have on the beach, making sandcastles, eating ice creams, and when I have an habit of bringing my daughter to everything, because I think having a daughter makes me a better architect. And she ate a very full of E-number slushy ice cream that had a very similar color to these columns. And my colleague Tom thought we could make some columns like that. So my colleague Tom Bacon, the project architect, worked together with local works to develop a technology to make these. And then these were cast by a specialist. So it's not painted, it's not applied, it's cast. And initially when we developed this technology with local works, we were intending to use the kind of aggregate from the demolition of the roof on the columns. We weren't able to do it for this project. We did it on another project because of the structural calculations and testing, and we just couldn't afford to do the testing this time. But I think these photos really capture our relation to the existing. So the building is made out of timber, the new building, and the existing is made out of block work. And I think actually the block work was initially, the existing block work was no longer being fabricated in the UK or in Europe. So we found a material, so the brick bond is new as well, where we had to infill the wall to make it the right height. So we made it deliberately different. And yeah, and this is the existing. So we enjoy the age and the patina and and we were lucky that our client was happy not to make it look pristine as well. So yeah, this is how it looked, and this is how it's looking today. And I'm sure you can see how it became a much more civic building, and it's interesting because it's actually a tiny building as well, but it's been made to look very big. Unlike the previous project I just showed you, Bruce Grove, which was still a tiny building, but made to look as tiny as it could be. So this was a couple of weeks ago. Again, on the same theme, but a very, very different scale. I'm going to very quickly talk you through the Westway project, which is maybe a kind of structure that you're familiar with, which is a huge flyover that was constructed in the 60s that cuts across North Kensington, which sort of severed multiple communities. And thankfully, a group of local, or many groups of local activists set up a charity called the Westway Trust to activate and to use the disused spaces underneath this mega structure. And our work was to support this trust, improve some of these connections, improve some of these spaces. And again, so the raised motorway is there. I mean, we kind of didn't draw the motorway because it's the spaces underneath the motorway that are our realm, the public realm. And for this project, we worked with the Westway Trust and a company that focuses on co-design called Lugadera. And for approximately 5 months, we hosted co-design program, a co-design program, and we developed a number of interventions to improve the public realm along this huge space. The result was a very long list of projects, something like 50 projects, and we worked with Westway Trust, and they led on creating a platform where the projects were chosen by the community as well. I'm going to show you just one project, which is in the roundabout. But before that, I'm also going to show you a little bit of the tools and the kind of tools we use to communicate with different demographics and different age groups. Because and this was a kind of magazine that we co-produced with some local people. We actually had something that we always dreamed to have on all our projects, but we don't typically have the capacity to, which is we had a little pod, and we had a clinic. So for, I think, 4 months in this case, once a week or twice a week, there was someone in this pod, and the pod had kind of a window and presentation. So my colleagues, again, Tom Bacon, were there a lot and learned so much from that process of being there. They met with all the businesses. They met with community groups that didn't necessarily take part in consultation processes. We met with many people, but we'd also interview them. And for instance, here, this is an interview with Matthew Phillip. And again, he is the executive director of the Notting Hill Carnival, which, it's such a fantastic festival that happens under the Westway as well, once a year. And yeah, it was such an amazing journey to learn about the vibrant cultures of the Westway, and really to start interventions, we really needed to know about these. And again, these are some of the examples of conversations we had. And this is how we started to communicate in this magazine, the different kinds of funding that there was, the different kinds of projects that we could have. And this also had an Instagram account that was run by, I think, one of the community group leaders. And yeah, I mean, the project has this very long list of projects, and they are being implemented slowly. And one of the projects that was picked by the communities was to improve the spaces around the roundabout, which is a sports center. And our budget was stretched as far as this area. So it's called Pear Tree Walk, and the foreground of the entrance for this sports center. So again, it was a very humble budget, but we used it wisely, and the patterns were again a process of co-design, and we worked with local schools to develop that, and had conversations like, what the seating should be like, what do you want to see in this space. And we also collaborated with an organization called Making Space for Girls, which is an organization in London. And with them, we set a series of workshops, which we did with both boys and girls, and we had lots of different scenarios, and that helped us design the street furniture for this particular street. And yeah, again, very tactical interventions. Things like just having fun line markings can make a real difference. New planting, new signage, lighting, and creating the dwell spaces was the focus for us. And you can see the kind of use that this space has, and it's made the sports pitches real stages, and people can now sit and look at their friends and children play and practice sport. And yeah. So again, I've tried to have a kind of influencing person for each project, and I think Colin Ward really captures the spirit of this project, not just when the community activists back in the 70s formed the charity to becoming hosts of these incredible infrastructure, or the spaces of this incredible infrastructure, but also by the way we curated interventions, and by the way we worked with all the different tensions, all the different groups to shape a recipe book for improvements. Part 3, stewardship as long-term thinking. This project is a project that is currently on site, and it's a kind of pilot project for the TfL, which is transferred for London. And it's seeing retrofitting the historic fabric of a row of historic railway arches. And this is how they looked about a year ago, or 2 years ago. And really these spaces were locked, and if you were a member of the public, you didn't know they existed. And they were originally envisaged as workshops and garages to support the railway infrastructure at the beginning of the 20th century. But over the years, they became, they remained workshops, but they had no investment. And again, with the TfL wanted really to activate some of these spaces and make them become more useful for communities. And in the Kilburn High Street, there isn't really a public space. So this project has created a new square and a muse. And this project, actually, TfL worked over the years. Again, this building here served for TfL as a clinic, not in this current, that particular branding, but they had very extensive clinics with local community members, with passers-by, and for over a period of a year or so, they defined the brief, and they saw that there was a lot of hope and a lot of appetite to seeing these spaces become public spaces. So we worked with Webb Yates engineers to really turn these incredible spaces into energy efficient spaces. And again, we worked with the client team and with engineers to future-proof and unlock these spaces. Initially, we were asked to look at the whole property portfolio in Kilburn, and we created a design code which became a manual for development and for retrofit, using Kilburn Muse as the pilot and as the test bed for learning. And the idea is that TfL has lessons learned at every stage, and that's going to form part of the design code as well. So this is the new square here that we made for a very busy high street that has very narrow pavements. And this space is going to become public space. And the new units will have tenants such as bakeries, restaurants, offices, gym, and the yard will be a nursery, but again, we have designed the foundations so that a two-story building can be built here, but we haven't designed it. We really wanted to design it, but it wasn't part of our brief. So we made several models, but really the work of doing the frontages is quite precise, really, because of the way of the muse. Each facade has to be 60 minutes fire rated, so there was only one place that could fabricate these particular curtain walling system. Initially, we actually wanted it in timber because the historic frontages were timber, but because of the fire requirements, we couldn't make it in timber. So we made it in steel, and this is a helpful model that helped us communicate how the arches would look. And helpfully, I don't have an image of the historic frontages, but it learns from it as well. So these are some elevations. I'll show you some renders of these and some drawings of works from site. Ooh, interesting. So yeah, that is an illustration of the new square. The idea is that this building will be a flower shop of some kind, and this is the entrance from the other side, which is tight, but again, the design of furniture and tree planting will make it a more welcoming entrance. And this is actually the bin store, which we really wanted to have a civic presence and not look like a back. The idea was that we didn't have a back for this muse. And this is it in construction. So on the final part, I hope I'm not running too late. Part 4, co-authorship as a form of practice. I think I talk about co-authorship a lot, and all our projects are defined by conversations. All our projects start with understanding who will the project affect, how can we learn from these people, and trying to understand who are the real stewards, who are the real champions of each project. And perhaps because David, particularly as an educationalist, and he brings that spirit of training and that spirit of learning for every project, and that's infectious, really. And these are some examples of work we've done. So, for instance, with Bruce Grove, we did documentary filmmaking workshops with someone that worked at the BBC doing documentaries with local children, and that has sort of led to understanding Bruce Grove in a very different way. A picture over there is David and Amika, I believe, in one of the conversations at the West Way. And I'm going to finish by telling you about a project that actually happened in 2017, so it's a little bit old, but I think it really tells our philosophy of practice and co-design, which is the Erith Lighthouse, which was a temporary pavilion that only lived for 16 weeks. But I think it has had a huge influence in the way development is rolling out in Erith. And also it had a huge influence in the way we do projects as well. It started with a collaboration with the decorators, which you might have heard about. Carolina Salcedo and I've forgotten. Susanna, I can't remember her surname, apologies. Met with over 50 people in Erith, and they asked them, what is exciting about it? So these conversations were deep dives, so one-to-one conversations, not what you call a normal consultation process. So they are intimate conversations and they take a lot of time. But they were also on the basis of a concept that's called 6 degrees of separation. So one person recommends the next person to go and talk to. And so on this journey, we learned so much about Erith, but we received a menu for projects. So the first commission was to do a meanwhile use strategy, and the lighthouse emerged as a solution for that, but really was on the basis of all the intelligence and all the generosity of these people talking to us and sharing with us what they liked about Erith, what they brought to Erith, what they could bring to Erith if. And though that became our guidebook to Erith, and every time we looked at a potential project, we had a kind of ecosystem of connections, and the lighthouse kind of brought a lot of things together. So one of the comments that was throughout the conversations is that Erith didn't have many places to eat at night. So during these 6 weeks, we created a supper club. And we invited chefs from the neighborhood to kind of curate a night. And this was an incredible work that the decorators curated. They curated the evening meals at the lighthouse, as well as they curated the pavilion, all the activities. And at daytime, it was a cafe. And this cafe wasn't just an ordinary cafe, it was a school. So there was a school that didn't have many opportunities to train people. So I can't remember the name of the charity, but again, during these 6 weeks of summer, people had a place to train to become baristas. It was also a place for events like community groups playing the ukulele could come and host events there. There's a local brewer as well that also hosted events there. A local library, which became a community group that also started doing events there as well. And yeah, so the lighthouse became sort of a beacon for testing and wondering all the possibilities that Erith and new development could bring to Erith, particularly as the development since the 80s in Erith has sort of lost or failed to connect to the river. So the lighthouse has become, in people's memories, but also in photographs, something that really recognizes that Erith is a place by the Thames. So with these I finish, and working in public is quite demanding. And a process that we have to make visible, we have to be generous and invite participation, we have to share authorship, and we have to be stewards. Care is not something that's just about Nostalgia care is very important with everything we do. It's about learning about places and conditions. It's about respecting the embodied energy. It's about having attention to detail, because quite often detail reveals everything. And repair is about choosing adaptation over demolition, which is something that we all having to face today. And I think our discipline really has to come to terms that the solution isn't a new build. More often than not, is how we can fix social infrastructure, create conditions for new opportunities and vitality, and making visible sometimes what's hidden. It's about stewardship for unknown future users, building flexibility, prioritizing whole life carbon, creating slack for future possibilities as well as caring for ecological ecosystems. And co-authorship is about working in public, transparently, sharing power, and valuing community expertise and accepting conflicting views and accepting that the outcome belongs to everyone. Architecture and buildings need patient work, generous work, working that honors what exists, repairs what's broken, stewards what remains, and shares with authorship. I wanted to thank all my team over the years, and particularly David and Amelia. Thank you.
Cristina, thank you so much. This was really impressive. I mean, what a great opportunity to see that the architecture is not only about those huge complexes financed by developer companies, and that is also about caring for small projects for public good, as I already put it. So thank you very much. And before we start with the questions, I have two very practical questions. First one is really like a grassroots question. What about, how do you gain the work actually? Is it like public architectural competitions on any kind of public procurement, or how does it work, working for public sphere in London?
Oh, yeah. Yes, so something, something I tried to explain at the beginning. So yeah, public work is typically tendered, so it's a competition process. But in the UK, there is this, or in the London context, there is a framework which I presented right at the beginning, called A+U, and that's called a framework. And that framework, I think, has a life of 4 years or something similar to that. And so you have to compete to be part of that framework. And once you're in the framework, you have to compete to get the work. So yeah, it's like a 2-stage process. And more often than not, so instead of competing with the world, you compete with 5 people that have expertise in your field. So it's quite tough competition. But yes, it's through that particular framework, the Mayor of London's framework. Initially, it was set up for London, but now different local authorities in England are using this particular framework, just because the GLA regeneration unit has gone through a very precise, very rigorous vetting process, so they know that the architects and the designers and the artists that have been shortlisted for these work fulfill some of those standards that they're looking for. But yes, all our work tends to come through competition over competition. Yeah.
Okay, so quite difficult work how to get it.
Yeah, I would like to say that if I had to quantify how much of my actual time goes into competitions, I probably spend 25% of my time on acquiring new work, which is a great process because you get to learn about so many places, because every time you receive a brief, you have to do a deep dive. And so you might not win all the projects, but you learn a great deal. So it keeps you being a student almost.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions from the audience, please. You have many questions. Okay.
Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. I know most of the students here are actually busy this moment with a competition project where they have to design new facilities for a school project. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I think it's also more on behalf of the students, is you make use of a lot of didactic architecture or teaching through architecture. What do you find works better when working with people who aren't necessarily architects, say for instance school districts or community members on that? What do you find is more important? Is it the way you draw? Is it the way you engage with these people? What would you say is one of the most important lessons you've learned as an architect on how to work with people who are not architects?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think understanding one's audience for everything is really important, and working, but it's also about exercising. So one of the things we do with actually my daughter's school is an architecture club. And that architecture club is a really good way of training our team members on communicating with children. But it's also a really, it's a dual benefit because it's also expands the horizons of children into environmental practice. And we almost, with the architecture club, we almost can try and redefine what architecture is. And it's fun because they don't really know. So you can tell them what you want architecture to be, which is, it's about forest school, it's about, so I think it's kind of interesting because with that particular exercise, which is the architecture school at my daughter's school, it's been quite useful because we address some of the challenges with spatial things in the school, but we also test what architecture can be in terms of city making, in terms of the different scales. And exercises can be making a den in a forest, which not a real forest, a little garden in the school, but it can also be teaching them how to measure and survey a library. So that's a test bed for us. I think you can communicate places in so many different ways. So for instance, doing documentary and interviewing people is another tool. And I think it's all about actually listening. Sometimes in developing a project, you don't need to show anything. You just have to listen, and you learn so much, and you can capture what you learn. You can capture what you learn in that process by making yourself available, not to come up with a solution, but to understand that most of the time, who you're listening on, who you're co-authoring, they will know about the place much better. And so it's about adjusting your communication tools depending on the project and depending on the people that you're trying to communicate. I think the Irith is another really good example, because the process of refining the brief, of making decisions was completely, we could have never foreseen the projects without the nearly 50 conversations that the decorators had. So yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you very much for the interesting lecture. I just have a short question regarding the visualizations and images you showed.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, or was wondering, because you said you use them as a tool for communication as well, not just as nice visualizations, also as a tool for communication. So did you make the experience that they somehow work better than, for example, renderings, because they, I don't know, leave space for imagination or space for discussion, and you can, I don't know, maybe they are more playful and leave the space, or why did you choose this specific kind of, yeah?
So like with everything in life, there's many possible responses to your question. The first answer is that it's about the tools that we have, and I think we quickly developed this way of communicating and making these kind of naive renders when we were students, and it was a methodology that we could use very easily. And then my colleague Gilbert Lung he's got a real sort of sense of aesthetic, and he's really led on that kind of way of drawing and making images for our projects. And we feel that a render can feel too real, and it sometimes it's not received in the most it potentially is perceived as deceit. And I think by making them illustrations like that, we also test our designs through them. So we tend to show to people the sort of in presentations like these, the last ones, but we do a lot of iterations, and we use them as design tools as well. And I think because we use them as design tools, and we don't use the latest technologies for image making, and we want to continue using Photoshop and make our images in a very manual way, then yeah, we initially was about the resources and the technologies and the techniques we knew how to use in 13 years ago. But now I think it's become a statement, and it's become an in-house style. And we have local authorities asking us, will we just do the images? They don't actually want our thinking. And we have to say no. But yes, it happens.
Any other questions?
Thank you. In the second part of your presentation, as you were talking about the project that you weren't supposed to talk about until February, you've mentioned that you had to balance multiple needs, and one of those needs was a dune system. That is a phrase I've heard for the first time in relation to architecture, and I'm curious about what it is and how did it influence your project.
I was hoping no one asked that question. That's a very hard question. So the dune system is basically, it's one of the boundaries of our building, is to a dune, and that dune is protected. So any works we do to that dune has to have a special permission from Natural England, and we have to have an ecologist to inspect the site. So there was a kind of a framework that we had to obey in doing any work around that dune system. So it was a very complex party wall agreement. It wasn't a party wall agreement, but it was a very complex logistic legal agreement, and one that had to have an ecologist and had to have a lot of attention from the contractor as well. And yeah, so any works around the dune had to be protecting the dune.
Any more questions? We have some questions on the Slido account. One of the questions the students asked anonymously is, in your Kilburn project guidelines, the ones you did with the West community and things like that, how did you try and prevent gentrification in the project? For example, how would you work so that a local or a community member would still be able to open a coffee shop or whatever, and not just some Starbucks or franchise?
Yeah, so I believe I believe that TfL is priority for independent, and I think the ethos of Transport for London is very much about supporting local businesses, supporting innovation, and I think they have a program that specializes on that. As you can imagine, working with an organization such as Transport for London is quite complex, and they have a lot of different departments. And whilst we as architects don't have the agency to determine the businesses, we design spaces. So for instance, the flower shop is a tiny little unit that wouldn't be anything else other than a space for an independent flower shop, and the same with some of the units. So the kind of character and size of each unit is really lending itself for independence. But it's also, I have to say, we're very privileged to be working with TfL because they have that very much on the agenda. Again, I think the local authority is quite quite strict on that too. So I think the big agents within the client and the stakeholder team all want very much it to be for local communities and not for big corporate organizations.
There's one more question. This one is more related to the types of projects that you accept and take on. The question goes, how can architects really engage with, wrong one, sorry. How would you react if some developer offered you to design a new massive concrete block apartment, which is, say, for instance, a well-paid and long-term job providing security? how would you react? Is it something that you have the luxury of saying we'd much rather do something smaller and more appropriate?
I think it's a very esoteric question because I don't think any developer would look at us and propose such a thing. It's just they have so many architects that already demonstrate capacity, knowledge, and I don't think it would ever happen. And if we would have to have like deep conversations about sustainability, about carbon impact, you know, like I think we'd only take it if we could go on a journey with a client. And I think with engagement and with our process of co-authorship, it takes incredible clients because we have a process, but we can't define what the brief is until quite a lot has happened. And it takes a great deal of trust to go through that process. So I think with a developer, we would have to do the same. We would have to find ways to define the brief together, and we will know that all these discussions would be in place, and by the end, if we can work together, I think during REBA stage 1, we either define the brief that is for all of us or we don't.
Thank you.
I mean, Cristina, thank you very much. I guess we can end your presentation exactly by that, because I mean, this was quite such a lot of moral and ethics inside of this answer that I hope our future architects, because the students are in their last year, that they will take lesson of it. So, Cristina, thank you once again very much for being with us, and yeah, good luck with your beautiful work.
Thank you so much.